tisha iterambere rya Afrika ariko hifashishijwe ikoranabuhanga. Uno munsi ibihugu bigera kuri 24 bimaze kuba umunyamuryango wa Transform Africa, aho bagamije kwihutisha iterambere ry'umugabane wa Afrika by'umwihariko hifashishijwe ikoranabuhanga. Uno munsi hano mu Kigali Convention Center ku nsanganyamatsiko ivuga ngo kwihutisha ubukungu bwa Afrika hifashishijwe ikoranabuhanga niki cyakorwa. Ikiganiro cya mbere kigiye kuba nyuma yuko Minisitiri w'Intebe aza gutangiza ku mugaragaro ino nama Transform Africa igiye kuba ku nshuro ya gatanu. Ikiganiro cya mbere cyaza kurebera hamwe ukuntu ubukungu bushingiye ku ikoranabuhanga muri Afrika bushobora kuzamura umugabane muri rusange. Bakarebera hamwe ese Afrika yagaze he uno munsi. Ino nama ije nyuma gatoya yaho ibihugu byamaze kwemeza gushyira amasezerano cyangwa gushyira umukoro ku masezerano ku bucuruzi bwambukirana umupaka muri Afrika, icyo tuha Continental Free Trade Area. Bagiye kurebera hamwe ese ni gute buno buryo bw'ikoranabuhanga bushobora kwifashishwa uno munsi kugira ngo bihutishe iterambere rirambye. Tutabarambiye rero, reka dukurikirane ino gahunda Transform Africa igiye kuba ku nshuro gatanu i Kigali, huje abantu benshi batandukanye, harimo abakuru b'ibihugu bazitabira ino nama, harimo abakuru b'ibihugu na za guverinoma, harimo abaminisitiri batandukanye, harimo n'inzobere mu miryango cyangwa se mu bihugu bitandukanye ariko bafite aho bahuriye n'ikoranabuhanga muri rusange. Reka dukurikirane ino nama Transform Africa.
Our young Africans are living in a brave new world. It is not a future they imagine, it is a future that is their current reality. And it is incumbent on everybody in this room to ensure that as we talk about how to make African cities smarter, more efficient, digitally capable, that we think about who we are talking about, how we're going to make their lives easier, and why we're doing it. But also it's important to realize that with the advances in medical science, many of us in this room are going to live longer than what was previously anticipated. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be disrupted. So we're also here to talk about our self-preservation. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Transform Africa 2019 in Kigali, Rwanda, and I wish you a successful conference. Without further ado, please can we receive some opening remarks from the Director General of Smart Africa, Lassina Kone.
Right Honorable Ministers, Dr. Nyeri Edward, Honorable Ministers, business leaders, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, bonjour, salam alaikum, muramutse. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for responding to our invitations to the second Transform Africa Summit Economic Forum. Some of you had to travel long distance to be here in Kigali, a beautiful city. We appreciate your presence today. Being here in this forum sends a clear signal of your commitments to Africa's digital transformation agenda. Today and over the next few days, we would be delighted to interact and engage with you. We also wish to have a productive and successful engagement. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, technology can help Africa reach its socio-economic transformation goal if used smartly. It can help us reach them faster. We are here because we have a shared belief and value that we can make a difference individually and collectively in the respective role we have, whether it is a private sector or public sector, academia, or the youth. Together, we have embarked into a digital transformation journey that will have a profound impact in our continent, the impact that is beyond what we can imagine today, because seeds have endless outcome. As we kick off this economic forum, please remember that you are bringing an important contribution to building the single digital market for Africa. I would like to extend my sincere appreciations for the support, engagement, and commitment you have demonstrated so far to the Smart Africa initiative. I would like to commend and thank the government of Rwanda and the people of Rwanda for putting significant time and resources to host you in this beautiful city of Kigali. Finally, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to His Excellency Paul Kagame, the President of the Republic of Rwanda and Chairman of the Board of Smart Africa, for his personal and conditional support and leadership to the Smart Africa Alliance. I thank you very much. Once again, welcome, Murakoze.
Thank you for your remarks, DG. I referenced earlier that Africa is a young continent, and I think over the next few days you're going to hear that term a lot, because it is the reality with which the continent faces itself, but it is also the opportunity and the resource upon which Africa can draw on as it talks about growth transformation strategies. Right now, we wanted to use the opportunity to introduce you to a young African, a pioneer in her own right, and whose journey through technology has really helped her raise her skill set, exposure, and capabilities in the fields of e-commerce. So for our Smart Talk this morning, welcome warmly Fatoumata Ba, the Chief Executive of Django.
Ladies and gentlemen, growing up as a shy little girl in Senegal, I used to ask myself a lot of questions and actually to bother my family with them. And I remember at that time, my most favorite question was to try and understand why our continent was so rich in natural resources, yet the least developed. And fast forward to 2015, I was privileged enough at the age of 28 to lead what is the largest e-commerce player in Nigeria and now in Africa, which is Jumia. And I had more and more questions bugging me about Nigeria. For instance, I had hard times understanding how the country could export its finest quality leather to Italy while importing every year more than 22 million pair of shoes from China. I also had hard times understanding how the country could export every year great quality cotton to China while importing tons and millions of clothes in the country. And it's the case in all of Africa. We import roughly $1 billion of value of clothes. And I also had hard times understanding how Nigeria could export its crude oil and keep importing refining oil. That being said, growing up in my journey as a tech entrepreneur and investor, I had even more questions bugging me, and I wanted to run some of them by you this morning. I'm sure you know that Africa has already today the same population and same GDP as India, with 100 more mobile phones than India. Then how is it possible that Indian startups attracted 17 times more funding in venture capital than African startups? I'm also sure that you know that Africa is the fastest growing region in terms of mobile phone subscriptions and e-commerce shoppers. Then how is it possible that when we look at the e-commerce B2C index, out of the 9 least prepared countries for e-commerce, 9 are Africans out of the 10. The first country in this index out of Africa is Mauritius, and it ranks at, I think, the 55th place. I'm sure you can see how Rwanda is a hinterland country, and Côte d'Ivoire has direct access to the sea. So how can it be possible that the internet cost of 1 megabyte of data is $8 in Rwanda and $60 in Côte d'Ivoire? Why is that? And the list goes on and on again. And on a personal standpoint, there were at least 3 questions that were keeping me awake at night. The first one was looking at the US having 1 retail outlet for 400 inhabitants, while Africa has 1 retail outlet for 60,000 inhabitants. And to me, that is a massive driver and main driver behind the success of Jumia. It's not necessarily that it's the best tech platform or anything. It's because of this kind of paradox. I'm also always surprised to see how Africa can be only 3% of the worldwide global trade. And when I deep dive, I can see logistics costs for SMEs as a major hindrance of competitiveness. For instance, in East Africa, it can be up to 75% of logistics cost represent as a percentage of total merchandise. In US, it's 6%. 6% versus 75%. And that's why my team and myself, for instance, piloted an export platform for Ivorian SMEs last December. It's called JetSport. And I have a third question that I'm very passionate about, which is a funding gap, because we see tremendous opportunities, tech-enabled on our continent. We see also the talent. We have the same, even better talent, resilient, but issues with access to funding. And that's why I started a couple of years ago being a business angel and professionalized it, launching a studio, investing in Ivorian and West African tech startups, and now closing actually a VC fund to be able to fund more African and young startups to help leverage technology to bring not only economic performance as a result, but a double bottom line, also creating better and faster ways to have access to essential services such as healthcare and education, improve access to employment. BCG is predicting that e-commerce by 2025 will bring at least 3 million net jobs in Africa, and also help our SMEs have better access to markets, to capital and capacity. Because we all have to remember that at the end of the day, this is not a technology problem. It's not a feel-good stories or only an inclusion program. It's about leveraging technology to actually drive development, and there is a business case for it. But at the end of the day, I think we are also all tired of asking ourselves endless questions. And what makes me feel great today to be with you is I think if there is anyone in the world who have great answers, but more than answers, the capacity to drive change, it's you. Head of states, policymakers, private sector, institutions, investors. So I hope that when we meet next year, it will be to report less and less unanswered questions, have more and more answers, but more progress. So this is not, I hope, another speech with great facts and figures and stories, but a call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatou, and thank you also for raising the questions that will be asked most definitely over the next few days, but saying, can we answer them this time around? Can we come up with the solutions and look beyond the problems? And may I just second that and reiterate it as we think about the kinds of conversations we're going to have here today. Let me just remind you, for all, in fact, for all of us here, there are translation earphones. If you're looking for an English translation, channel 1, French, it's channel 2, and Arabic is channel 3. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you now to the Honourable Minister of ICT and Innovation for the Republic of Rwanda, Her Excellency Paula Ingabire. And I found it quite intriguing that the title was not just Minister of ICT, it was innovation. And I don't think there's any other minister with that portfolio or title in Africa, which not only reiterates and reminds us of Rwanda's commitment to this idea of Africa transforming and moving into the digital age, but it's really focusing the mind of the minister to the work that this government and this region can do and achieve. So please welcome warmly the Honourable Minister.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister of the Republic of Rwanda, the ITU Secretary General, the Director General of Smart Africa Alliance, representatives of the African Union and the World Bank, honourable ministers present here today, heads of delegation, business leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. I would like to start by thanking each and every one of you for being here today. Thank you for honouring our invitation to the second Transform Africa Economic Forum. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our lead partners for the summit this year, who were the government of Kenya, the World Bank, Tata Communications, and ADS. Thank you for being generous with your time and resources towards making this summit a success. We are gathered here as leaders to chart the way forward as we transition into a digital economy. With so many opportunities at our disposal, a growing youthful population that necessitates innovative ways of creating jobs to truly sustain economic growth for the continent. Designing innovative financing instruments, developing human capital are all priorities as we chart the way forward. The African tech landscape has and is revolutionizing thanks to the mobile telecom revolution, enabling us to leapfrog decades of traditional industrial development. We are seeing more and more hubs across the continent, from Smart Village Cairo, Technopark Stellenbosch in South Africa, Technopole de Dakar, Konza Technopolis in Kenya, and our very own Kigali Innovation City in Rwanda. All these host entrepreneurial initiatives aimed to respond to the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly addressing poverty reduction, wealth and job creation, community development through innovation and technology. We continue to see investor willingness to inject into the African tech startups rise. Last year alone, investments in the tech startups on the continent saw an increase that broke past the $1 million mark that had been previously expected to be passed in 2020. Venture capital has more than doubled since 2015, seen through the increase of startups that were able to raise funding and attract investment from $277 in 2015 to $1.1 billion in 2018. This opens doors for FDI, which on top of creating jobs, also scales national revenues collected. Fintech companies have been at the forefront of startups, attracting 39.7% of total funds raised on the African continent, followed by agritech. However, there's a need to begin to charter efforts and stimulate investors' attention to sectors such as healthcare, transportation, education for the full spectrum of sustainable development. Investment is continuing to grow, but we need to leapfrog the opportunities and build strategies that enable more favorable entrepreneurial climate, unlocking more funding, and facilitating innovators to address the fundamental African challenges with homegrown solutions. There's also a need to ensure that startups with genuine solutions are not suffocated by the large companies. Digital technologies unlock opportunities for entrepreneurs to directly access global chain markets as well as compete at the same level as the large corporations. Therefore, empowering them and easing their exploration of digital technologies is imperative for Africa's transformation journey. Through the Kigali Innovation City, Rwanda is opening up to Africa as a world of a proof of concept hub to attract talent, to build and test innovative ideas, and reach the rest of Africa. There's also a pressing need to create an ecosystem that allows African innovators to reach their full potential. Currently, not all the needs of the African innovators are adequately addressed by existing programs. An example is the lack of programs that mature startups become investor-ready for a large round of financing. Another example is a few experienced mentors for tech startups. To build a sustainable innovation ecosystem, as partners, both governments, the civil society, the industry, we need to implement incentives that go beyond financial compensations and answer the needs of entrepreneurs. We need to build on the strength of research of universities by nurturing startup scenes and promoting the academic and industry collaboration. We also need to ensure a long-term local talent development strategy in place for the continent. And lastly, we need to ensure that public investment that is being made in the innovation hubs can be matched by the private investment through all stages of the startup life cycle. I would like to conclude by saying this: the Startup Africa journey is one that is timely and requires for us as governments and leaders and the industry to collaborate and put in place a conducive environment with parameters that facilitate innovation processes for our young entrepreneurs, from ideation to prototyping to commercialization and expansion. Finally, I would like to welcome the Right Honorable Dr. Edward Njirenhe, the Prime Minister of Rwanda, to give his opening remarks. Right Honorable Prime Minister, you're welcome to deliver your keynote address.
Honorable Ministers, Head of Delegations, Technology Business Leaders here present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is with great pleasure that I'm joining you today at this economic forum of the Transform Africa Summit. Let me begin by welcoming you all to Rwanda. As you are aware, this forum originates from the desire for African governments and the private sector to create a single continent-wide digital market. This market will enable Africa to fully benefit from the digital transformation, attract large-scale investment, and create jobs. Africa has the fastest growing youth population, with more 140 million young people now than a decade ago. By 2028, the African continent will be hosting almost 1 billion people under the age of 25. This young population presents an opportunity to optimize adoption of technologies as the younger generation is eager to embrace the digital era. This is where we see the value for startups, which play globally a significant role in economic development. Across the world, startups are currently being championed by the youth, who are actively creating jobs and transforming their communities. They bring new ideas to the table, much needed to stimulate innovation and generate competition. Distinguished guests, technology is very important. It offers an opportunity to realize the integration of the continent faster and smarter. In addition, technology breaks the usual borders that has traditionally defined our countries. Because of this importance, the government of Rwanda, through our National Strategy for Transformation 2017-2024, aims at ensuring digital literacy for all youth, especially 16 to 30 years old, by 2024. This will be possible by implementing a national digital literacy program. This program has the objective of achieving digital literacy of at least 60% among adults by 2024. For this reason, discussions which will take place today are timely and crucial. But beyond conversations, the collaboration and the partnerships carry the potential to change the course of history of our continent. I would like to urge all participants to this economic forum to use their expertise and advise our continent on how we can accelerate sustainable socioeconomic transformation and increase entrepreneurship to drive growth, reduce poverty, and create wealth. I am sure your deliberations will be full of ideas that will be discussed in the 2019 Transform Africa that will be officially open tomorrow. As I conclude, I would like to highlight that today, Smart Africa enjoys a strong political will to change what has been the status quo for a long time. In this regard, I wish to reiterate the commitment of the government of Rwanda to the realization of Smart Africa's vision. It is now my pleasure to declare open this economic forum of the Transform Africa Summit. I thank you for your kind attention and wish you a productive and successful series of discussions and engagement. I thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Right Honourable Prime Minister, and thank you also for officiating over the opening of this morning's Economic Forum. So, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, in the last 45 minutes, we've really put it to you and challenged you to be part of the growth, development, acceleration, advancement of Africa. A young African has posed a few questions to you, which we hope will be answered today and over the next few days. The Honourable Minister of ICT and Innovation has shown you the depth of Rwanda's commitment in seeing the growth through science and technology of not just this economy, but of the region, and opening its doors to those who want to be part of those solutions. And those views were reiterated by the Prime Minister. So what we're going to do now is introduce you to the panelists as we talk about how the digital economy can fast-track integration on the continent, because this is a very important conversation. We're having politicians, to a large extent, doing the very best that they can to complete protocols and treaties around a continental free trade area and integrating our economies at a policy level. The question is, what can business do and how can technology harness that? So please join me in welcoming those who will be part of this conversation at this juncture. We have, in no order of preference, Dr. Alzi Kanza, who is the head of Africa at the World Economic Forum. She'll be sharing her views. We'll also have Fatoumata Ba, who shared her insights, and she'll be joining us as the CEO of Django. They'll be joined by Nick Rudrick, who is the Chief Executive of Liquid Telecoms. Joining us also will be the Director General of Smart Africa, Lasina Kone. And then we're going to have some interventions that come from the floor. And whilst that happens, okay, I acknowledge that. And whilst this is happening, please can we also allow the Prime Minister to make his exit before we begin our conversation. Could we thank him for his time? Do I have all the panelists on stage?
Yeah, I think yes. We have.
And finally, could I invite Pierre Guillain, the Vice President of the African Development Bank, to join us? So we're supposed to have technology help us, but my technology is moving at a much slower rate than what I'd like it to do. So just bear with me there. So the topic for this morning is how the digital economy can fast-track Pan-African integration. I think just by way of getting everybody's thoughts, in less than a minute, could I ask you to share your views? What is this connection between the digital economy and regional integration? It clearly wasn't apparent to me when I began. I thought regional integration is what the politicians are doing, and the digital economy is what business are doing, and yet there's alignment here. Elsie.
Thank you, Lerato. 1 minute is quite tight. Essentially, I'll just focus on connectivity, and so integration offers the opportunity for connectivity at scale. And if I just focus on one initiative that we are supporting, which is Internet for All, connecting the unconnected, integration offers the opportunity for Africans to interact seamlessly in the digital space across the continent.
Fatoumata?
Well, speaking as a tech entrepreneur, which is an e-commerce player, that used to be an e-commerce player, I see the access to larger markets and the competitiveness, especially of logistic costs, as main drivers or hinderers of, I think, integration in terms of trade. For instance, when I was in Côte d'Ivoire, we had very hard times supplying the demand that we had cross-border from Côte d'Ivoire because of the lack of custom integration.
DG?
Yeah, in integration, African integrations, when we talk about this single digital market, it will not happen until we all embrace the fundamentals of ICT into our community and into our government. As you know, the digital transformation, it is the process by which every single nation or country has to go through in terms of processes in order to really harness and integrate. It basically means anything we do in a conventional way has to change in the digital way. So that will follow a lot of processes and steps.
Nick?
Well, as the continent moves towards a wide free trade area, one of the key enablers of that will be connectivity and the ability to communicate across the continent. Already we see the majority of voice traffic takes place between neighbouring countries, yet that currently isn't matched by flows of data traffic which are carrying the e-commerce of the continent. that still is something that flows out of the continent rather than within. And I think that's one of the key challenges in developing an integrated digital economy for the African continent.
And Pierre.
Thank you. So yes, digital economy is global. Africa is 54 countries. And if we want the digital economy to grow, we need to break these national boundaries down and create a true single market. At the same time, for the private sector, there's also a key role to play in making that happen. It's not just politicians and regional economic commissions or the AU Commission. It's also private sector to make that integration happen through political, economic, and business cloud.
So a few things have been said here this morning, and thank you for giving us summations of your views on the topic. But let's hone in on an issue that both Elsie and Nick raised: connectivity. We're talking less than 10% internet penetration, and for those who do have access to the internet, the costs are exorbitant. I mean, there are campaigns from South to East Africa about reducing data costs. So this begins to be a real barrier for transaction and trade, does it not, Nick?
Well, I think everyone wants to see the cost of communication coming down, particularly not only within nations, but across the continent. I think one of the challenges which the continent faces is really to develop a whole ecosystem of services that has integrated fiber, mobile networks, and e-commerce and cloud services that run on the top of it. I think at the moment across the continent we're looking at a dysfunctional ecosystem which doesn't generate the kinds of returns and revenues that really the industry needs to deliver an integrated network. I think we've seen with new cloud services which are primarily supplied from outside the continent, whether they are e-commerce or whether it's WhatsApp or those kinds of services. We've seen revenue flows really leaving the African continent and being generated outside the continent. So whereas before we would see revenues from voice traffic and other services all remaining locally, we are now seeing a lot of those revenues through advertising and other services really being generated and kept outside the continent. And for us to develop and invest in the networks locally, we need that ecosystem to really go back to a position whereby we are hosting the cloud services on the continent, where we are building data centers here, and where there is a investment right across a whole variety of technologies in order to build the networks that we need.
Mr. Kone, I saw you nodding. Do you want to add to what's being said about connectivity?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's put the fact out, because the facts are really stubborn. We have 51% of the world population connected. 49% of the world population not connected. A combination of submarine cable and satellite and all type of medium for communication, it covered close to 95% of the world surface. So what is the problem, including Africa? It is the willingness. It is to attract the population to use online services, number one. Then when we talk about, particularly about the African case, when I say a combination of all medium of communication, satellite and submarine cable, it covered 95% of the world. So what's the problem in Africa? It is the fact that Africa, it is not interconnected. As my colleague has said, if you look at the continent, we do have a submarine cable. We don't have a lack of capacity, but our data, our voice is going out. So every time we sit on the internet trying to browse, we browse and it's going outside. So when you talk about, everyone talks about Africa being the fastest growing continent in the world, but it is the most expensive continent to access the internet.
I'd like to bring Pierre into this conversation because obviously as the African Development Bank, you're almost an interface between governments and private sector in terms of development financing. Whose job is it to bring in this core infrastructure that will connect Africa? Because for the private sector, it's huge capital expenditure. The telcos will tell you $1 billion each year in laying the fiber optics. And the government will tell you we need to roll it out. So why don't they roll it out then?
Good. Excellent question. So, in a nutshell, what I would say, it's 70% political economy, 30% business solutions. Why do I say 70% business political economy? Africa, first, has been a tremendous success story when it comes to connectivity. We see what has not been achieved yet. We tend to forget the tremendous pace of growth we've seen over the 20 past years. So Africa is a continent that has shown that it was able to take advantage of new technology, take the mobile technology 20 years ago, and really take full advantage of it. Take mobile money and see how the continent became a leader in this space. So the potential is here. But today, I would say, for us to see more investment in connectivity, we need a more favorable overall environment, more favorable investment climate, and a more open one that goes beyond border. It is not easy, and you can ask my neighbor, to design projects that go across borders, to get rights of way, to develop continental or regional systems. So I'd say 70% political economy, 30% business solutions. So my challenge would be to say, okay, let us, whether it's regional economic commissions, it's probably easier, or other groupings of countries, set some targets. Say what it is that you want to achieve in 3 or 5 years, and we and other development partners will work with the governments concerned, the regional economic commissions, the private sector, to try to make it happen. I think we need to have some ambition. I think we need to state those ambitions, but in a pragmatic way, in a way that can be tackled concretely. We, for example, at the African Development Bank, only have at this point 2 active projects on backbone fiber connectivity, and that's Central African Republic and Chad, which, as you will recognize, are not exactly the easiest markets. Private sector don't come to us for financing. We have financing available, and governments don't prioritize connectivity in their request to the bank.
I don't want to belabor the point, but Nick, as a private sector player, I just want you to give us, in a short synopsis, an understanding of how it's done. How do you get the job done of laying this infrastructure for connectivity, whether the governments are working, not working, the regulators agree, don't agree?
Well, I think overall the general environment across the continent, and bearing in mind that every country is different, has improved enormously. I think there's often conferences that talk about difficulties of way leaves and those kinds of things, but I think that those have largely been overcome. There's a great deal of enthusiasm and government support almost everywhere to roll out new infrastructure, to roll out fiber. I think what we're not seeing is the kind of integration from one country to another. If we look at inter-Africa data flows, the data flows within Africa is only about 2% of the total data that Africa is carrying. If we look at physical goods, it's higher than that. So the key challenge is not so much anymore based on physical obstacles or regulatory obstacles, but how do we get data flowing between nations rather than within nations and then effectively exported to the rest of the world.
Elsie and Fatu, I want to take the conversation forward a little bit. It's still connectivity, but it's now social impact. I remember speaking to a CEO of a telco on our BBC show, and he said, the reality is this: Africa, or the continent in general, has dual economies. You have urban, rural, rich and poor, and you have people living in the 4G world, and a big chunk living in the 2G world. And you can't provide solutions for everyone. Is that what's happening here when we talk about digital economies? Those who are in the uber sophisticated digital economy, smartphones, financial services, and those who are still somewhere voice, not quite data, not quite wireless, and need to make the leap.
Thank you, Lerato, for bringing this topic. I actually don't believe in this divide. I actually believe that in Africa we have the opportunity to use technology as a fast track for the real economy and especially the informal economy. And speaking of my experience, I had in Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, the project to build a local value chain of fashion designers. So I went out to find 200 of them, and we had focus group with roughly 80 of them, and picked 70. Most of them did not go to school necessarily. They are not tech appetent. And to give you an example, when I was going with my MacBook and my slides to pitch one of them, he was a bit provocative, and he was like, you know, what is internet? I don't even have an email address. But then we sat down and we started talking about the right incentives and the right languages, and we talked about increasing his sales and reducing his costs for transactions. And when we looked at the value chain for a fashion designer, there were 4 questions they were asking me. The first one was how to bring the supply costs down. This was not the toughest to answer. We will sometimes bring them together to order higher volumes and bring costs down to give the extra gain as a margin to them or as an extra purchase power to end customers. Second question was, but what does the market want? Here as well, I had data point, and I could tell them, if you start making fashion garments for women, start with dresses, it's our top category. For men, start with shirts. And by the way, you should start with accessories so that we don't have size return issues. And then the third question was the trickiest one, and they were telling me, Fatou, but the banks are not lending me to be able to grow as per your sales and your business plan. And I started actually delaying my own salaries in Côte d'Ivoire for a couple of months and funding small batches. And what was very exciting is, out of this pilot, 2 years afterwards, we start deploying millions of euros of capital to SMEs and start actually having those fashion designers be top sellers. I have one of them, Mr. Kwaku. I visited him 2 weeks ago with the European Investment Bank. Out of this pilot, now he has his own website. He doesn't even rely on only this e-commerce platform to be able to sell, and we are actually talking about selling cross-border through another platform that we'll be piloting later in June. So I don't buy into this divide between the informal economy and people who did not go to school. There are ways to build capacity, and I can have so many examples, right. But I believe that the thesis, which is double bottom line, which is how can we maximize the economic opportunity but also create more inclusion in the access on this platform, is the right question for us to ask and to answer.
Elsie, is the digital economy for rich middle-class Africans?
From where we're sitting, we're concerned about how we advance a digital economy and society and ensuring that Africa is not left behind. I'd just like to share a small trend that we've observed just as an organization, which also speaks to the earlier point that Nick made about the ecosystem, which does not necessarily evolve in a linear fashion. In 2016, when we held the World Economic Forum on Africa meeting in Rwanda, we launched Internet for All globally, beginning with Rwanda, and we've seen tremendous progress made in bridging the divide and in new partnerships coming together to close that gap. But what's also happened since 2016 is we've seen new initiatives being launched to address other needs, but leveraging digital, so financial inclusion, innovation in agriculture, anti-corruption, digital trade, digital identity, digital Africa, data policy, agile governance, cybersecurity. These are all communities that are involving both the public and private sector to address real needs. Now, the challenge, though, and this is the opportunity that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement gives us, is to replicate and scale these examples, because they often happen locally in countries, single countries. For Internet for All, we have Rwanda and South Africa as examples. The partnership with Smart Africa that we have is to say, how can we take the lessons from these two countries and scale it across the continent?
I'd like to move the conversation along. So Africa is known for having pioneered mobile money. We own it, we did it, and I think we deserve a round of applause. And whilst that has worked fantastically, we can't seem to get that level of integration and dynamism in other sectors. What is it that mobile operators and banks have done really well that could be replicated in other sectors?
If I may challenge Nick, is it true that mobile money has worked evenly across the continent?
Okay, not really well.
In terms of the adoption?
I think it depends from market to market. Africa is not a continent, it's not a country. That's true. It hasn't worked in Southern Africa, but it's got its own peculiarities. Bob Colomer will tell you it's because the banks are vicious in South Africa.
So maybe on that topic, one of the reasons mobile money kind of spread rapidly was because there was a regulatory void. And entrepreneurs took advantage of it, and then slowly regulators came in and started filling the gap. So today we still have a bit of a regulatory challenge in that space, and I think it's going to be the case in most e-service areas. Why? Because it's not just the regular telecom side, it's the interface of telecom with commerce, with transport, or in this case with financial services. And so seeing how these different set of regulators come together to enable or to stifle the development of e-services, I think is really where some of the key challenges lie. For example, and I agree, on mobile money, we still have quite a way to go. For example, we're working right now with support from the Gates Foundation, France and Luxembourg, on making mobile money interoperable within the West African Union économique et monétaire West Africaine, the 8 Francophone West African countries. It's very complicated. You need to get telecom operators, financial service providers, central bank, and the like to come together, agree on common platforms, on common protocols, and then integrate services so that if you are an MTN subscriber in Côte d'Ivoire, you can send money to an Orange subscriber in Senegal, for example. So these things are a bit complicated, and they take time because they involve technology, but it also involves regulation. And here, we're talking about a zone of a single currency, right? The CFA franc, so which makes it easier. So I'm quite confident that we can build on those experiences and rapidly expand these opportunities for interoperable money. But for the other sectors, we'll need to do similar things. We'll need to get the transport regulators either out of the way or to become more cooperative. We'll need, again, to find many of these solutions that cut across national borders and become regional solutions. So these are some of the challenges I see.
But please indulge me here. Let's just, for the now, say this is something that's working really well, albeit in East Africa. I take your point, Elsie. But it is something that can be leveraged, and it is a lesson that can be used or something that can be emulated in other areas. What is the thing that has worked really well within East Africa, mobile money, telecoms and banks, that is something that can really be sort of repeated elsewhere?
I would actually stretch that and say, at least from the outside looking in with a global perspective, is the power of mobile telephony, not just money, and how it has been leveraged to introduce a proliferation of services. It could be insurance, just using a mobile phone, making payments that's much more advanced than in other parts of the world where those conveniences already exist. And a question that we're grappling with is, what is the next level? How much more can we use mobile first to help drive the transformation that we need across the continent?
DG?
Thank you very much. I think to leverage the success that Africa had on the mobile money, first of all, we have to give a round of applause for our telecom operator because they've done a pretty good job in Africa in introducing that technology. But it's the role of the government now to be able to give orientation in terms of policy. Now, coming back to what really we can leverage, we all talk, the whole world talks today about artificial intelligence. I truly believe in Smart Africa. The artificial intelligence, it is going to be the next booming in Africa for a very simple reason. Today we talk about smartphone, we talk about internet literacy, which require everyone to have a minimum of education, right? Then we have our grandmother in the village who do not even know how to manipulate, let alone to do USSD code to be able to transfer money. There are today the natural languages processes today to take the AI onto the phone where your grandmother will say, send $100 to Mr. John Smith in Kenya. That way, you are actually shrinking the gap between uneducated people and people who are electronic savvy. So that's where artificial intelligence will play a big role in Africa. That's what I think we can leverage right now.
Fatu and Nick, let me bring you in here because you are the techies sort of on the panel. Now that this issue of artificial intelligence has been raised, could you tell me the future you imagine for Africa? When we're talking smarter cities where technology can regulate traffic, electricity, driverless cars, is that what artificial intelligence is going to do for Africa?
Well, I think Africa is very good at leapfrogging technologies and moving forward then a lot faster than has happened in the rest of the world. And, you know, these kinds of events, I always notice that there's a lot of government people, people linked to government, who like to come and criticize themselves and try and find things wrong with the environments that they're creating. But I think overall there have been enormous improvements and progress across the continent, virtually without exception. And you know, this ranges not just from mobile money, but if you look at electronic clearing at borders, we do a lot of connectivity to border posts, so there is seamless electronic clearing. The amount of time it takes now to clear goods at borders, particularly at physical borders for trucks and airports, has reduced to a fraction of what it was several years ago. So enormous successes. You know, what impact will artificial intelligence or machine learning have on these kinds of operations? Well, I think what it does help us to do is to take all the data that we will start collecting and be able to forecast and make better decisions about what it is that governments and regulators need to focus on. You know, bottlenecks and choke points will be much easier to identify because this enormous amount of data we're collecting will be much easier to analyze and you know, make automated decisions on, or bring problems to the attention of government and regulators.
Fatu, what's the future you imagine? Is it those driverless cars? Is it paying using cryptocurrencies? Are we going to get rid of all our national currencies? We want to be blockchaining?
Well, you know, I have to say I'm one of the skeptics when it comes to you know, relying on the safety of driverless cars at this point. But you know, I think as far as the continent is concerned, you know, I think it really, to me, is more about taking the huge amounts of data that we're collecting and being able to analyze it and make much smarter and quicker decisions with it.
I see people shaking their heads. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. In fact, to piggyback on what Nick just said, data is nothing. A collection of data becomes an information. Information becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes wisdom. In order to have that, we're going towards a knowledge-based economy. It has to be governed. A fundamental thing we talked about when we talk about connectivity. Connectivity is nothing if we don't put a proper reform, a proper law to protect African data, such as an African-based GDPR, for example. That is the only way that will attract investors to come to Africa. We have a hosting company because we will have a telecom infrastructure and we will have the energy to be able to support it. Together, coupled together with an African-based data protection law, which will allow people to trust each other. Now talking about a trust. By nature, every single country in Africa, they have a different level of maturity. And they grow in a silo. It means, I'm not saying they don't trust each other, however, they're very wary, cautious about each other.
Yeah.
We, in our role in Smart Africa, to be able to anticipate what is to come, blockchain is something we need to look into. Because the blockchain technology is a technology that allows you. We do not trust each other, but we have to have a common denominator to do our KYC. So it's very important, first of all, not only connectivity in Africa, laws for data protection and personal data protection, cybersecurity and data transactions law, to be able to come up with a law which will actually protect. That's the only thing that will keep data in Africa. As long as there is no law, it's not going to work.
Fatu.
Well, it's interesting because on one hand, I'm a tech entrepreneur, so I'm kind of a geek, and I believe in the power of 4IR. On the other hand, I'm very pragmatic, and I think that if we want to be able to have widespread usage, we need to be also very pragmatic, not talking about technology itself, but again, the usage it drives, the problem it solves, and the needs it can help solve as well. And to give you an example, at some point, I realized that we were bringing an e-commerce platform to bring goods, essential goods, closer to Africans. And my own grandmother, she lives in Senegal. She did not go to school, and every month, for instance, she buys a bag of 50 kilos of rice. And she did not have any way to know that she could access those products if I was not her grandchild, because we spend all our money doing ads on Facebook and Google, right? So with my team, we started a small pilot. We started with 120. It was actually housewives at that time. And we gave them tablets, and we told them, okay, maybe you can make extra money or actually sole income selling products that you see. It's like your virtual catalog to your family, your neighbor, your church if you go to church, or your mosque, or your school if you're in a university. And we grew this pilot up to 45,000 people in a matter of 2 years and a half. And at the end of the day, the question was not, was technology the right tool? It was really, again, what was the need and how technology was a way to bridge the gap between the supply and the demand in a very relevant way. And I hope that when we discuss about these policies, we also are very pragmatic in finding the relevance with end users.
Yes, so Lerato, back to your earlier point about AI. Yesterday I had the privilege of meeting students who are doing their masters in machine learning at Ames, and what they're looking at is very much what you alluded to, which is how can we adopt these technologies to solve our problems. And one of the students, who actually happens to be Rwandan, actually flagged that language is a barrier right now in terms of communication. And what she's looking at is leveraging AI to remove that barrier when it comes to communication. So I think we need to pay more attention and invest more in our own scientists who are coming up with solutions that may not make sense in a different context, but are integral to who we are. And then back to the earlier point about tech governance, I think the key message here is that the whole world is struggling with this. The forum's taken the lead in terms of setting up centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and they're primarily focused on technology governance. And so in this regard, Africa is not lagging. We definitely also have a role to be actively engaged, and fortunately we have some governments who are also participating in this process.
It's a new field for everyone. Finally, Nick, I don't want to belabor the point on AI so that we can get to the audience sooner. You wanted to say something to it.
Yes, we're talking about data and a digital economy, but where is Africa's data? Google, where is our data? It's not in Africa. Facebook, where is our data? It's not in Africa. If we look at all the cloud service providers who are providing services into Africa, where is our African data? It is not being kept and stored in Africa. Right. There's only one of the large software companies that hosts its data at a hyperscale in Africa. Only one out of them all. So I think the big question for me always is, where is our African data? Because it has been exported and is being stored and is being kept in data centers outside the continent. And for me, that is one of the key aspects of delivering and achieving our own digital economy here, is for our data to come back to the continent and to be kept and used and applied with machine learning and other tools here for our own benefit.
I want to latch on to the word you've just used, export. Where is our data? It's being exported, it's being hosted abroad. Pierre, let me bring you into the conversation, because regional integration, in a technical sense, means integrating value chains. Means that if something is being produced in Rwanda, you can source the parts from Kenya, and you can produce a component in Uganda, and then the big thing somewhere in the region. how do we create those value chains using digital systems? Because it would help a lot of factories and a lot of manufacturers cut out the bureaucracy.
No, absolutely. Let me just quickly rebound on the data center thing. We at the African Development Bank are keen to finance African data centers. So if some of you in the private sector there are keen to find financing, please come talk to me afterwards. But so on the value chain, this is an absolutely fascinating point and absolutely critical one. And again, here we see technology giving an opportunity to break through existing barriers for regional integration of value chains. It's already difficult to do a value chain within a national context. Why? Because typically a good value chain implies maybe 3-4 different sectors, 5-6 different ministries or regulators, and then the whole thing to gel is not easy. When you multiply by 2 or 3, it's kind of an exponential growth in complexity because of the number of actors you have to align. So what I would say is, one, we need more African champions. Successful African companies that have developed a core business in their own country to invest in neighboring countries, to invest across the continent. Why? Because, again, it's this interface between, in a sense, politics, business, and technology, where we need business to become much more of a driver and less of some group that waits for the enabling environment to be there. Business has to help create that investment. So if you are a significant investor in Côte d'Ivoire, where I'm based, and you have a cotton production business in Burkina Faso next door, the weight that you bring in your exchanges will allow you to break through some of the barriers that smaller players cannot break through. And there are lots of these barriers. They're not necessarily on paper. The laws and regulations have improved significantly. There are a lot in practices and behavior. And for that, I really feel that we need this domestic African private sector that has often flourished with some degree of comfort from its national environment, right, to go outside of its borders and to help create these value chains through a much more aggressive investment outside.
I want to stay with you on that point, and this might sound simplistic, but please just work with me. If the private sector are the ones who are pioneering these technologies, if the private sector are the ones coming up with solutions and the infrastructure, and the private sector can do it irrespective of whether there are continental free trade protocols that have been signed, then really and truly, do we need the government in this conversation?
Yeah, we do need the government because we have 54 countries, with 54 sets of regulations, with 54 opportunities to make it easier or more difficult for these value chains to develop, for this technology to spread, etc. So it's really about finding ways to improve that interface between private operator and businesses. And again, as I said earlier on, one of the ways to do that is by setting clear targets. This is what we want to achieve together. How can we get there? And not in 30 years, but in 3-5 years, so that you have concrete steps moving forward. But so there's no way to find solutions without involving national governments actively. And that is not just the private-public interface. It is also many of our governments, not just in Africa, are kind of siloed. And one ministry or regulator doesn't really talk too well to its neighbor. In this age of rapidly advancing technologies, technology cuts across not only countries, it also cuts across sectors. So we need governments that are able to talk to one another, to talk to business, and to create these open environment that allow the private sector to thrive and grow. And the reason I focus initially on African champions, they're going to pave the way, they're going to help develop ecosystems where SMEs will then also be able to flourish, etc. But you need that power, that strength to kind of open up the system.
Does anybody else want to add to this issue of value chains and manufacturing? Okay, then my final question to you before we get our special intervention, and I must ask it as a journalist. As I said earlier, we're living in an information age, and it's been facilitated by this. You read your news here, you interrogate the issues here, we generate content here, and content is an industry in itself. Think Nollywood, think YouTube, advertising. And yet we've got governments that are insistent on wanting to control the flow of information, on clamping down on how this technology is used. When we talk about democratizing the digital economy, it's not even access anymore. It's saying to the governments, stay in your lane, sit down. We can handle this.
Thanks, Lorato. I think there's a reason why we have governance. It's also to protect us, as well as to uphold universal interests. And a key challenge we face with technology is that it's not net positive. We're seeing that with cyber attacks and the whole dark world and what is happening there. We're seeing it with abuse of data and with new data privacy rules being introduced so that people can own their own data and be able to control how it is utilized. So I would argue that we need to find a happy marriage, so to speak, because if we're advocating, for instance, with our entrepreneurs to use and pursue e-commerce and have governments able to shut down the internet for indefinite periods, then those two transformation processes and sort of protective stability interests will be at loggerheads.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Before the internet, before all this technology, before we were able to actually store all your data on your laptop, the government was not interfering. Fundamentally, let's go back to 101. If you have a population, you need to administer them. That's rule number one. How to administer them? Who are you? You have an ID. You have a medical insurance. Do you work? How much you make? Normal, basic information. We're going to be transformed into a digital world where it is every single possibility. Look at what happened in New Zealand.
Yes.
In the name of freedom. Everyone is on the internet. Everyone is on the Facebook. They browse anytime. No, not they browse. They stream anytime. Have social media provider, have they done their KYC? Who are you and what do you want to do? It's a basic question. Why today we are so scared of our kids at home? Why today we have a cyber safety? Why do we have a cyber security? Why do we have a cyber criminality? Because everything everything we used to do conventionally, where we were not worried at all, then you have to worry online. That's why the government needs to intervene to give policy orientation on what's good and what's bad.
Yeah.
Yes, so I'd like to take another angle of to your question. I think what we need really is governments that are out there providing digital services for business, for entrepreneurs, for their citizens. Governments that really go online, that allow people to transact online, to get their licenses online, to get their birth certificates online, etc., to kind of develop digital IDs for citizens across the board. Ask governments to move to cashless government without kind of transfer of money, etc. Ask governments to buy more and more into this powerful way of being a better government for all people. You will have a built-in mechanism to keep an internet that is open all the time, because the government will be a big actor in it. Surely how you regulate it and who has access to it is going to be still relevant, but shutting off the internet, as you've seen in some countries, may not be an option anymore if so much of the government-to-citizen relationship depends on that vital link of communication.
All right, now we're going to have a special intervention, and if our cameras could focus on her, please. It's Dr. Prerna Germazi, who's the Digital Director at the World Bank. And I'd like to ask of you, ma'am, to give us your views on this topic about how the digital economy can fast-track regional integration in Africa, and anything that we didn't really discuss on the podium, on the platform here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks. Great panel, great discussion. And I think what I'm hearing is the start of a symphony that is being composed by the continent about the importance of the sector. So I work for the World Bank. I've been in the bank for 14 years, working in the sector. So we moved from telecom to ICT. Now we talk about digital economy. In the past, our portfolio was very limited. And the reason is we were not asked to do a lot on digital or a lot of ICT. This is changing, and it's changing big time. And it's changing because we're hearing very clearly the voice of the continent from the public and private sector telling us that ICT and digital is not a luxury. We need to be thinking about ICT, about digital economy, about digital technology as an integral part of how we think about development. I think our thinking evolves because we listen to the continent. And there is a clear leadership. We heard it today in the panel. We heard it in the opening session. We hear it every day from the leaders of the continent. So we're very excited to be working with all of you on this important topic. I think thinking big is very important. Digital knows no boundary. We spoke already about data and how data, flows. We cannot put a boundary to it. But if we think about regional, I think it's very important because it's a sector that requires us to think big. Each country in Africa to itself is a small market, except for a few, right? But if we look at the whole continent as a single market, this continent can easily compete in the global digital economy. Today, Africa is home to 1.2 billion population, but there is a very short number of unicorns. How can we be talking about digital economy that is inclusive if we don't have the same number of big players in this space? So as we think about digital economy, we need to think about the foundation of digital economy. And I think if we give a regional dimension to each foundational element, the path for digital transformation will be faster in the continent. On digital connectivity, and the panel did a great job in showing that still, in many cases, data and voice needs to travel outside of the continent to come back again. Without this regionally integrated, fully integrated digital infrastructure, we will not be able to be talking about a true digital economy. This is very important. If we want to have the region host those mega data centers and data to stay in the continent, we need to make sure there is a mass of connectivity out there. And when we talk about connectivity, this is where I really like the discussion. You spoke about data and you spoke about artificial intelligence. I think in this continent, this is a continent of leapfrogging. The definition of infrastructure is beyond network. When we talk about infrastructure, the infrastructure of the 21st century, this is data and this is artificial intelligence. Because if we need to close the gap, it's not only closing the gap on connectivity, but also thinking about a new gap that is opening and opening fast. So a true vision of working together, having a regional approach to close the gap that exists today. We're very happy that the world reached 50% of connectivity, but it took 50 years to get to this stage. Is it going to take another 50 years to make sure that everybody is connected? So thinking big is very important on this particular space. What is also important is we think about the platforms, whether it's digital ID or digital payment system, making sure that those systems are interoperable and talk to each other, create the scale that is very important for the continent to think big. You spoke about digital skills. Very good. Very important. Do we need to have digital skills thought about at national level or regional level? When we go towards very deep specialization on technology, it's very important to map up few centers in the continent that would go deep into the technology of the future and train the citizens of the continent. I think that an approach to regional skills is very important. And the same goes for entrepreneurships and for the other elements. So we're very excited to be working with all of you in this space. I heard also a very important topic in the discussion that is about collaboration. And I think collaboration takes so many layers. It's collaboration within governments. Today, we heard it yesterday in a meeting, Do the ministers of ICT speak the same language as the ministers of finance, as the ministers of health, as the ministers of education? If we talk about digital transformation, it's not only having the sector that is up and running, but having the possibility for the sector to change every sector of the economy. And that language of collaboration within government is very important to take the continent to the next level. Collaboration between countries, of course, that's the regional approach and the topic of the session, but also collaboration between the private and public sector. You know, innovation doesn't happen in government offices. Innovation happens in the private sector. How do we create that language of collaboration between public and private that is based on trust, but also that is based on a deep understanding that the public cannot do it alone and the private then cannot do it alone. And this new collaboration language is very important. The last element of collaboration is collaboration among partners. There is a lot of work that is happening today in the space about digital economy, facilitated by the African Union, facilitated by Smart Africa, where different partners who are excited about this initiative, excited about digital economy, have platforms to talk and to exchange ideas and to see how different partners can build on each other programs to take the continent to the next level. So we're very excited to learn from the continent. I think the continent has so much to offer, and I think the continent has very great starting points. We heard so much about it today. You know, mobile payment in Africa, we're being asked by other regions in the world how Africa did it and what is the success story behind it. And if we talk about infrastructure and the lack of old infrastructure that needs to be updated, there is a true potential of leapfrogging. We heard it today from the panel. So how can we build on all this great environment? The youth bulge is definitely an advantage that the continent has. Right. How do we build on this? Build on the vision, build on the leadership, build on the African institutions that are very interested to take to take advantage of digital economy, to really make digital transformation something that will not happen, as Pierre said, in 30 years, but that's something that's happening today and something that can take the continent to be a true player in an inclusive digital economy. And I want to stress the word inclusive because, you know, if we don't take care of those who are not connected, you know, the poor in the rural country, in the rural areas, the women, you know, if we don't have a deliberate effort to think about it, I think the digital economy will not be inclusive, and that's not what we want for this continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Germazi, who's the Digital Director at the World Bank. Now we're going to take questions from the floor, and I see that the room is perfectly divided into thirds, 1/3, a second, and the whole. So what we'll do is we'll take the first batch of questions from this side of the room, get the answers, from the middle, get the answers, and then from the last part. And we have 30 minutes left in the conversation, so I'll allocate 10 minutes worth of conversation to 1/3 and then another and the other. So from my left, are there any questions, please? Please state your name, the organization you represent, and your question. Whilst we're waiting for microphones to make it to this side of the room, I'd just like to pick up on a point that Dr. Germazi raised, the link between innovation, R&D, and I was just reminded of a World Economic Forum report that showed absolutely a direct correlation between the spend in education and the spend in innovation hubs. And the countries that have done really, really well are the ones that have funded education and funded more than 5% of their GDP to R&D. South Korea, Australia, Japan. When do you think we're going to get a future where African governments are spending a significant proportion of their GDP towards research and development? Are there any questions here? Okay, maybe you're still shy, middle of the room. Is there a lot more courage? There we go. I see it. Yes, sir. Two sirs. Why don't you both stand up and then the microphones can get to you easily. Go ahead.
Excusez-moi, je vais parler en français. Alors, moi, je me présente, je suis Bohen Dawadi, je suis architecte, donc j'ai rien à voir avec le monde du digital. Par contre, je m'occupe du programme Tunisian Smart Cities. Et si je suis là, c'est pour parler d'éléments importants qui sont liés à la connectivité de l'Afrique, puisqu'on présente ici un programme qui s'appelle African Digital Hub. En fait, la société civile tunisienne, l'association Tunisian Smart Cities, porte aujourd'hui un programme qui s'appelle la Tunisie Gateway de l'Afrique du futur. En fait, on a imaginé sur les 4 points cardinaux de l'Afrique, on a imaginé sur les 4 points cardinaux de l'Afrique des centres de connexion et de collecte de données qui vont nous permettre de garantir nos données en Afrique. Sur ce panel, on a parlé de données. Monsieur, vous avez posé la question, où se trouvent nos données en Afrique? Nos données se trouvent à Marseille, chez une société qui s'appelle Interxion et chez une société qui s'appelle Jaguar Network, qui comporte l'ensemble des données africaines, les 2,6, je pense, vous me corrigez, de gigabits de données africaines, qui sont plus que les données générées par l'Inde et l'Amérique latine réunies. Donc l'ensemble de ces données, on a un enjeu très très important à les garder en Afrique chez nous. Et il y a un sujet qui est très important qui est lié à la souveraineté numérique de l'Afrique. Pourquoi aujourd'hui nos gouvernants n'imposent pas le fait que nos données restent en Afrique et qu'on puisse les traiter tout seul et qu'on puisse les aborder d'une manière intelligente ensemble pour répondre à la question de l'interconnexion de l'Afrique qui a été abordée sur ce panel. Et merci. Donc je reviens sur la partie volonté politique, bien entendu. Merci.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the front.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ambassador Hussein. I'm the Director General of Universal Postal Union. I'm based in Switzerland. The panelists, great speakers, and the lady who has just spoken gave us a very good idea. I just want to be more practical. The young lady who's an entrepreneur here has told us her story. How does her products and services be visible to the rest of Africa? How does the millions of small business enterprises in Africa sell their products? Can they access, for example, the eBays and Amazons and the Alibabas of this world? Who is going to do that job for us? Every country here is struggling to set up the e-commerce platforms. Why is it that we cannot have a single window e-commerce platform with a distribution network, with all the barriers this lady has talked about, the problems of how she cannot be able to sell her products? How can we achieve one single window, continental-wide, digital platform where all our products and services will be visible on that place, and every country's product will be visible to every other citizen of other countries, and achieve the same one single digital platform? This is the question I want to pose, because this is the question I said yesterday when the ministerial meeting. That is the question we are answering as Universal Postal Union as a solution to Africa. And I want people to pay attention to what I'm saying. This is a solution that we have been trying to provide. But again, I want to ask, really, from the panelists here, how do you solve that problem? We have talked enough, and I recall here, President Kagame one time, when we met here, in the last meeting I had here, he told us, you can give great speeches here, you can come and renew your acquaintances, exchange cards, but what is the deliverable after the meeting you come into this place? Those speeches, inspirational speeches of the President, comes to my mind. After we leave this place, what are we going to do to help that young lady achieve what she wants? Sell her products to every citizen in this continent and outside. We should not be the continent of accepting only things to buy from outside to come to our place.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could the microphone... It was a great question. Are you standing to ask a question? Okay, please, go ahead. Can the microphone get to the gentleman, please, in white? Yep. And ma'am, in the green, you're also standing for a question. Okay.
Thank you to the panel today. Great conversation. My question is to DG and Nick about the data centers. How do you entice Facebook or Google to actually house a data center locally in the country? Obviously, government intervention is one way to say you can't operate here unless you do house your data center here. But beyond strong arming, how do you actually go about doing that? Naturally, they're American companies and would pull the data towards them because then that's where the revenue stays. So what would be an incentive to bring them here? Thank you.
And finally, yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Mrs. Job. I'm a program coordinator in African Alliance for E-commerce. Just say that African Alliance is a non-profit organization, African grouping, a single window for foreign trade. And my question is to all panelists. I would like to know how the platform can fight against illicit financial flow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we should begin from the start or work backwards. Okay, let's start with the question that's just been asked now. And I think it speaks to questions of cybersecurity and integrity of transactions and making sure that technology is not used for illegal activities. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll take the first. Should we start with the first question first?
We're starting from the back and then working forward.
Yeah, the question is why the government do not have a data protection law. You see, the answer to these questions, you ought to know something, and I think if I said it earlier or not, I'm not sure. The information is the only thing when you share it, it multiplies itself. We are to move from a paradigm of finite resources. Africa historically would be in the resources, oil, gas, and so on and so forth, and agricultural product. But the data component is very different. But the data can only be valuable from a data to a knowledge and wisdom. If it's not governed by law, it means nothing. So every nation needs to have, of course, some Smart Africa Alliance country have already started putting in place the fundamentals of data protection only nationally, such as protections of privacy law, transaction law, and so on and so forth. But alone, it is not going to lead us to an integration. However, government need to start with the law, data protection law first, because data is an infinite commodity. Private data, public data. It happened in certain countries. If you want your data to be private, there is a fee that you pay to the government. Or if your KYC information is the public, then you don't have to pay any fee. It has to start from that. I will answer these questions with the, I think, the answer will give a multiple, the question I will answer actually multiple questions. So when you have individual country providing data protection law, we need a lot of work in harmonization, said by special intervention here, harmonization between the country in order to integrate into sub-regional and continental prior to even the CFTA agreement. Because CFTA is based on what? In technology, we say free wave, they say free trade. But the wave has no boundary, right? Before, when you travel, when your mother traveled to a neighboring country, you have to write to them and you go to the post office. Then, after that, you have to go to the post office and make a call. Now you just do WhatsApp video call, right? It has no boundary. So to answer, so the government, we encouraging government to actually pass the reform for data protection until we get to African-like GDPR. Then we can be attractive. Because you see, you have to make the bride attractive by having a laws, infrastructure, intra-African. Then people who are hosting data centers like GAFAs, Amazon, and so on and so forth, they will know we have two fundamental things, which is one, we have a telecommunication infrastructure, we have energy and infrastructure. It's also coupled with the law of protection that they are actually benefiting from Europe or North America. But we have a big role to play. You see, government needs to take responsibility to actually give orientation and policy orientation towards a complete digital transformation of Africa. These are the laws we need to pass before we actually talk about private. That's why in certain countries in Africa, you will see that technology is way, way ahead of regulation. Then suddenly when the taxes start coming up from the government, the operators say, oh no, this is the new taxes. No, because we're always playing a catch-up. It's time to stop firefighting mode and planning mode, because if you fail to plan, it's the planning to fail. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're back at the first question, I think. So let me answer it in French, it was asked in French. Donc, je crois qu'il faut faire attention à, en fait, faire tout ce qu'on peut pour développer le système de données, les données digitales en Afrique, et à éviter de créer des règles qui pourraient freiner son développement. Donc, tout d'abord, je suis bien d'accord sur l'importance d'un cadre qui protège les données. J'aimerais souligner que ce cadre, de préférence, devrait être régional ou continental, parce que ça coûte très cher de devoir contrôler chaque législation nationale, se conformer à chaque législation nationale. Donc, dans une ère digitale, il faut que la réglementation de la protection des données et de la vie des données soit vraiment faite au niveau continental, régional, et s'inspire des grandes normes internationales également. Alors, je ne crois pas qu'il faut demander au gouvernement d'exiger que toutes les données africaines restent en Afrique. Il faut créer un écosystème qui encourage les entrepreneurs à créer des centres de données. S'il y a un problème qui entrave ce type de développement, examinons ce problème ensemble et voyons pourquoi ils ne font pas ces investissements. Donc moi, je serais beaucoup plus pour une politique d'encouragement au développement de l'infrastructure d'information, d'encouragement à l'investissement dans les centres de données, et voir quelles sont les barrières et comment pouvons-nous surmonter les barrières, qu'elles soient d'ordre réglementaire, national, régional, continental, qu'elles soient d'ordre de financement ou autre.
Then the second question from the middle of the room was very simple, but I think powerful. We're here talking digital integration on a continent that has lots of entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises. What is the solution for them? And can there be one platform where we market their goods and we also market what countries' capabilities and potential is? It's simple, but if it's so simple, why are we not doing it?
It's happening. And she will complement what I'm saying from a different perspective because she's part of the process. So the first point I'd like to make is the challenges that were posed with respect to the continent are also global challenges. Every entrepreneur should be able to sell to any citizen anywhere. It currently does not work that way. So in collaboration with UNCTAD and the International Trade Center, as well as Alibaba, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of 2017, a global initiative was launched called the E-World Trade Platform. And last year, during Africa e-commerce, which was held in Nairobi, we launched a platform to take a Pan-African approach to how we can ease the challenges that our entrepreneurs are facing with respect to e-commerce. And we'll actually have a session here to drill down much more practically, as you pointed out, in terms of identifying areas that we can take forward with specific interventions. And if you'd like to be part of that process, please let me know.
Fatou, you wanted to add?
Yeah, sure. I think, one of the common mistakes that I maybe see is maybe trying to find a silver bullet answer, right? When you talk to SMEs, they always talk about at least three problems. The first one is how can they access better to the market and even know which markets there is an existing demand for their products. It's not the toughest question to answer. The second one is how affordable can they move their goods? And I mentioned earlier how, it can cost up to 75% of the cost of merchandise to move goods from East Africa as opposed to 6% in Kenya. And you're right, it's not only about tech businesses. If you look even on the P&L of Dangote Cement, the logistic costs account up to 30% of the cost of goods sold. And he's an industrialist having 25,000 trucks. So it's a global problem in Africa. And then they also mentioned the working capital issue and the financing issue, because whenever we manage to help them to find, a market, so for instance, sell online on my platform or be connected on a foreign platform, to maybe ship logistics, ship with lower logistic costs. So for instance, I have an MOU with DHL, so it's a consolidation a platform that enables to have for an individual seller like you or your friend the same price as a bigger e-commerce player. So this is the concrete answer. But the working capital funding is always a make or break. And here, we won't be enough as tech pioneers to do it. Our balance sheet will not be deep enough, and we are not the experts, so we can only find the ways to, for instance, enable credit scoring, showing that these guys have a track record and we can predict their sales, so now you financial institutions fund them, right? And then there is also the question of capacity. I mentioned Mr. Kouakou earlier, but I have a seller in Côte d'Ivoire, Mrs. Diaby. I wanted to crack mobile phones, and I did a benchmark at that time. It was in 2013, and I realized that the supply of mobile phones is in open markets, so Trècheville and Adjamé in Côte d'Ivoire. And when I went to see her, she did not go to school, so she was not able, even with the training, to be able to operate her shop online. So I did a MOU with the Polytechnique Houphouët-Boigny, which is a top engineer school. So I would take batches of students, train them, and they will be the head of sellers of the e-commerce players that have a great product, great price, but lack capacity. And it's a win-win-win, because I have an opportunity to increase my assortment. The e-commerce, the seller has an opportunity to go online, even though he doesn't have, literacy or tech capabilities. And then the young graduate has an opportunity to get access to a job. But where I'm frustrated is these are anecdotes. And as you mentioned, we need scale. And to need scale, we need people like you. First, stop thinking about the threats only. I hear you about regulation, but I'm also a bit afraid because, when we started as e-commerce 7 years ago, there were no regulations. And of course, we need to be able to protect people, but we need to be able to do so in a matter of seeing also the opportunities and not only the threats.
Very briefly, Pierre.
Okay, so I would say briefly that I don't think a single digital platform for Africa is a solution. In this area, like in others, we need competition. We have competition in retail, we need competition in e-commerce as well. What we do need is more open access, and we also need, in particular, better way to do execution. Ask any e-commerce company today that does business in multiple African countries, ask them how they do business. Many of them will tell you they do it everything's through Europe or other places, Dubai, whatever it is. That the country-to-country e-commerce is very small, partly because the logistics and customs issues, etc., are too difficult. So that, to me, is one of the big challenges.
And I'm going to throw this last one to you, Nick, the last two. A question was raised about the incentives that are needed to bring data centers to Africa. And to that, I want to add a question. We've seen an e-commerce company doing an IPO internationally, and the first question that was asked is, are you really an African company? And if so, why don't you use more software developers in Africa? And it's raised questions around trust. Do you even trust the capability of Africans to come up with the innovations in this space?
Let me answer the last part first very briefly. Just to say that there's an enormous amount of software development skills on the African continent, possibly more than what people think. Most of our software development is outsourced, in fact, to African countries. A lot in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa. We have got a lot of our software development being done, and the other countries that we're in. So, the skills are there, the capability is there, and, I think that, in fact, it's more cost-effective than going overseas, and the quality is just as good. So, I think for anyone out there who's looking at developing platforms, they don't need to look outside the continent. It's not necessary. I think the prime question was, how do we get the large cloud providers to host their content in Africa? I think there's a number of factors. including connectivity and power, but those are all solvable. So I'd like to just focus on one, which I think is becoming the most important, and that is policy, government policy. Cloud providers want to know that their data is secure. They want to know that that data can be exchanged freely across the continent and between countries. There are only a few countries at the moment that really have the critical mass of data to justify hyperscale deployments of data center capability. Most countries, however, would justify what an edge, kind of edge data center deployment, whereby local data can remain local, whilst the main computing power of the cloud is fed off regional hyperscale data centers. So we need to make sure that the connectivity is there, but also that the data protection laws are there to allow this exchange of data. So it's not just the data protection laws that are needed, but they need to be harmonized. And I think part of the free trade area of Africa and the creation of an African digital economy is to make sure that the data protection laws are harmonized across the continent without artificial boundaries being created as these laws start to be put in place.
We've got time for one last batch of questions by a show of hands. Yes, ma'am, please stand up. Yes, sir, please stand up. Yes, sir, sir, and the last one. That's it. Okay, so if a microwave, you can see where my mind is at. If a microphone could make its way to the front, please.
Hello, my name is Amy Marks. I'm the CEO of Excite Modular. I'm also the chairperson of the Edge Data Center Standards Committee in the United States for OpenIX. I think what Nick said is very interesting to me, and there is such an opportunity in Africa to surpass what's actually happened in the United States, because we've already learned some hard lessons, and you can learn from some of those. There isn't a lot of space for tons of hyperscale data centers, as you mentioned here, but there is a lot of space for small, scalable edge data centers that can become larger and larger as they grow. And I think the real opportunity exists here in Africa for a lot of the incumbent telecoms before you start getting into some private developers, which are coming along as well here in Africa now, for some of these data centers. You also have huge cable systems. I'm also a subsea expert in the CLS business. You have lots of cable systems coming here. You already have some cable systems. We've actually built CCOMs buildings. You have a really rare opportunity here in Africa to have the convergence of subsea and data actually be efficient, as opposed to having a giant gap between the small edge and the hyperscale. I will also say that being the head of diversity and inclusion for Suboptic, I've never seen so many women at any conference, and as well as women on the panel, so I applaud you at Transforming Africa for that as well. So my question is, Nick, could you give advice maybe to some of the groups out here that could actually take advantage of developing some of these edge cable landing stations and data centers, and how they can actually grow their own businesses, because that's really where we're going to start enabling entrepreneurs.
Great stuff. Could we pass the microphone on to the gentleman in your row? Nick, you got that, huh? That one was for you.
Yes,
Yes,
good afternoon. My name is Robert Kaihura, and I work with the law firm of Covington & Burling, where I focus on technology.
Could you put the microphone closer to your lips?
Sorry. There we go. So I focus my practice on technology and tech policy in particular with a firm called Covington & Burling. And I just, fascinating conversation, but just a few clarifying points. We've had 45 plus years of massive tech innovation, none of which has really impacted our continent, in part because we didn't have the infrastructure, right? So I think that's kind of a recurring question and theme that's popped up. So we haven't. The first fiber was laid in 2009, and we've seen massive improvement over the past decade. So I think that explains in part why a lot of these large platform companies have not invested here. That doesn't mean they don't want to. And it's worth noting that just in the recent past, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all putting data centers in South Africa. I think it's also important to call out the fact that it's just, we need to differentiate between, I think the term was African data or country-specific data. It's really about the individual data, right? Because all these services are about providing access or enabling individuals. And I think we're trying to find ways to create smart and enabling regulations that protect the individual but also accelerate innovation in key markets. And I think this is the point that the DG's made on several occasions. And I just want to echo, I mean, what will enable the continent is smart and enabling regulations that open the market up to multiple platforms, as the gentleman from the African Development Bank made. I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much. Could we get the microphone to the gentleman in front here? We're coming to you, sir. I see you.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Abdou Khan, and I'm from Senegal. So I'm the CEO of an ISP based in Senegal. I had a question because when we look at China, for instance, right, we see that China has Baidu, they have Tencent, they have Alibaba, they have developed big champions, been local champions. And why aren't we able to replicate that in Africa? That's just, I think, a simple question. Just trying to figure out what needs to be done. Is it government? Is it what type of protection we need to put in place to allow us to grow those champions before, I would say, being eaten by other software companies? Thank you.
Fantastic. Yes, sir. Yes. And then the last microphone to the gentleman behind him. Yes.
Okay. Bonjour à tous. Donc je vais poser ma question en français. Donc je m'appelle Adebisi Djogan et je dirige un cabinet de conseil en affaires publiques et je suis par ailleurs membre d'un groupe de travail donc qui s'appelle I4Policy, donc qui travaille à l'amélioration des politiques publiques d'innovation sur le continent. Et donc, moi, ma question, c'est, alors, qu'en pense l'innovation, les conversations qu'on a aujourd'hui en termes qu'on pense l'innovation africaine en termes d'industrie? Alors, en réalité, les discussions ou les pistes qui sont jetées de dire, OK, il faut libéraliser, il faut déréguler, ouvrir les frontières, est-ce que, dans une certaine mesure, cela ne représenterait pas un frein à la stimulation finalement du contenu de l'innovation locale, de l'innovation Made in Africa? Et est-ce que, en même temps qu'on pense ouverture des frontières, on ne devrait pas engager également des réflexions, des discussions sur des pistes donc d'une forme de souveraineté digitale, de protectionnisme digital, pendant qu'on stimule évidemment les start-up, l'innovation africaine, on protège de la même manière cette innovation et ce contenu local. Donc c'est ma question. Merci.
Thank you. And the last question.
Good afternoon, the panelists. First of all, my name is Prince Alex Harding. I come from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I'm the chairman commissioner of the regulatory body called National Telecoms Commission. I bring greetings from Sierra Leone to all of you here, from the President, Julius Maada Bio, and the country at large. First, my question or my topic is going to concern mainly on the presentation by the World Bank representative here, Dr. Gomazi. Normally when you hear about World Bank, you think of structural adjustments. Today I saw the human face of the World Bank giving us solutions that is so important to us coming from these small countries. I would like to talk on the need which you talked about for the inclusive digital economy. I would say democratization of the digital economy. whereby you bring in all the poor, the women, and the youth. These are the disadvantaged people in our society, especially in Africa, because of cultural limitations, etc., etc., and of course government policies. Then there's need for government intervention on holistic state, especially in times of education. Let the poor, the women, and the youth know that this is needed for their own development, including, of course, the development of the state and the economy as a whole. You need public education. You need education on a mass scale. To even we ourselves, who are leaders, we need also to be educated, that we need to bring on this group of people. Without it, the economy goes to a standstill. And she also talked about collaboration. Collaboration in every sector tends to conjure rejectionism, to reject. No, I'm not going to join with you. I'm talking from the standpoint of a government functionary for a length of time. Ministers tend to go into their trenches, want to not to be disturbed, including governments, not to say about the private and the public sector. The private sector, you can't blame them. They are normally concerned about profit. And the public sector, government in particular, tend to be concerned about social aspects, because to get votes at the end of the day. So how do you bring these two people? Okay. It's not an easy task. So I will say this conference should be a basis to send the signals to the lawmakers in our countries that this is necessary. This digital economy democratization is good, and it should be based also on collaboration. And that's the government policies. Whatever we do here at all times, I don't want us to leave out the government's politics. There's good politics, of course, which okay. I would say we should think of it seriously. That's my submission.
Thank you very much. Lots of questions, but many of them interrelated. Nick, a very specific one directed to you about how you can bring entrepreneurs onto the system. Instead of having big players that are controlling and running and administering these data centers, you could think of different ways in which entrepreneurs can come through, and she spoke of edge solutions as well.
Yeah, I think in brief, really, it is about creating a critical mass across the continent. I mean, the comparison was to China, where one has 1 billion people plus as a single market. Now, we also have a similarly large population in Africa if we treat it as a single market. At the moment, we tend to see developers working nationally in one country at a time. And I think if we want as a continent to develop the next Alibaba or Google or eBay, we need to take advantage of this single African trade market and be able to leverage it and build up the critical mass of customers.
There's also a question raised. I won't be as elegant in the way it was posed, but it had something to do with, a lot of milestones in sorting out the infrastructure gaps, but they exist. And then in addition, it was said, now the dilemma you face is that you've got data protection on the one side, and then on the other side, you want to access customers. And what's needed is the midpoint, the compromise, where you set up the necessary infrastructure to give business access to customers, but that doesn't compromise data security either.
Yes, well, I think at the moment there is no consistent and universal data protection policies across the continent. And I think that is one of the key challenges moving forward. Some countries have got, I would say most do not, but are in the process of implementing something. So I think that is one of the key things that hopefully will be delivered, over the next year.
There was a question, anybody can take it, on having open borders. Yes, regulation, but try to limit it. Open borders in that way, you get more startups coming into the system, more entrepreneurs.
Maybe I'll just echo what Nick just said, and also on the China analogy. I think open borders are essential, single market is essential. There's no way we can have Baidu, Tencent, or Alibaba with 54 national markets. And they're not just ICT markets, they're logistics, transport, and then every product market, etc. So that's absolutely critical, and technology can help open up. That was the early part of our discussion. One thing I'd like to be careful about it. I heard the word a number of times from the audience this morning, is protection. We live in a digital age, and the digital age thrives on innovation, on new ideas, on better tools. Protection takes the risk of shutting yourself off from that and being happy with basically substandard approaches. So I would be really focusing on creating that single market, on removing barriers to access, on increasing competition as the main driver, because innovation comes from competition. Surely we also need to put this whole policy and regulatory framework in place to protect data, to protect competition, etc. But these go together. So a word of caution, be careful about protection.
And finally, I want to just develop what the gentleman from Sierra Leone said. And he really reminded us about the human development component. Yes, he said governments are very important, and he said governments provide the education. And this goes back to what was said earlier on. Innovation that's needed in Africa is strongly correlated to education and governments investing in research and development. So as we talk about a digital economy for the African continent, what is the key intervention that's needed? In 30 seconds, Elsie Kanza.
30 seconds, tight. 10 years ago, I was involved in developing a startup framework for Tanzania, and also collaborating with the chief economist of the African Development Bank to look at a Startup Africa framework. At that time, the two main benchmarks were IHAB in Nairobi and CITI in Cape Town. Fast forward 10 years, we have over 420 tech hubs across the continent. And these are nurturing innovation. They vary in quality. That's not a problem. The more we support them, the stronger they will get. But I think we should not underestimate the role model effect of innovation when it comes to education. With traditional education, we looked up to lawyers, doctors, accountants. I think with innovation, we also need to be mindful about which are the role models that our young people can look up to, and then create the spaces where they can acquire that education, be it in the curriculum, through the main avenues, public education, or these alternative spaces that enable them to develop life cycles as entrepreneurs or by integrating innovation.
Fatu, the key intervention.
Well, it's a tough question, but I would say again, it's there's a mindset thinking of seeing opportunities and not threats. So, for instance, when I look at Etsy, it's the largest marketplace for designers worldwide, right? And you see Beyoncé wearing African designers, you see Louis Vuitton making collections with Pateo, so you see that there is a demand. But on Etsy, they have 45 million product shops since inception. Only 4 countries are represented. Like less than 10 sellers for 4 countries, out of which South Africa, Morocco, Ethiopia. Tech has an opportunity to level up the playing field and fast track for SMEs access to the same global markets, but we need you to bring the funding and maybe to help build capacity for the SMEs to leverage technology.
DG Kone?
I will say education. Because in Africa in general, the young generation, they tends to look for their role model. If you have a soccer player like a DJ Drogba in Cote d'Ivoire, they all want to be a soccer player. Yeah. If you have a Michael Jackson or a Davidoff in Nigeria, they all want to be a singer. So education education should be the model for us, because it's only through education the government will trust the startup and give them project. And if you scan the 54 African countries, you will see a disparity. You will see countries, they trust a startup. The entire country is governed by ICT developed by local startup. And you go to other countries, they don't at all. So it's based on the education. And if you go back 5, 10, 15 years, you will find those countries who are those countries where the startups are contributing heavily into the government development ICT, they started with the education.
Nick?
Thank you.
Key intervention?
No, I think that ultimately to realize the benefit of the digital economy, we need to make sure that data can flow easily, cheaply between all the countries and economies of Africa.
Fantastic. And Pierre?
Yes, so how do we achieve the digital single market? That's, I think, the big question. If you look at the European Union, they've done a remarkable job, but it's a journey. And that journey takes 10, 15 years or more. The EU hasn't completed that journey. They're still on the journey. So let's focus on what is that journey like for Africa? How do we break it down in digestible bits and make sure we go step by step to this truly digital single market that would benefit everyone so much, that would create this single market of over 1.2 billion people.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their insights. They are Dr. Elsie Kanza, Fatoumata Ba, Director General Lassina Kone, Nick Rudnick, Pierre Guilan, the Vice President of the African Development Bank, and we had a special intervention from Dr. Puthena Gumazi, the Digital Director at the World Bank. Before I close this session, I'm the only thing standing between you and your lunch. Let me tell you where that lunch will be. For those of you who are Platinum subscribers, please go to the Auditorium Club. Auditorium Club for Platinum guests, and then lunch for everybody else will be served at the Lada restaurant inside the Radisson Hotel. Lada restaurant at the Radisson, or on the side of the Radisson Hotel. I think it's this one at the entrance when we come through. I think we'll convene again at 1:30 when you're going to break, or 1:30, yeah? That's an hour from now? Okay, let's convene in an hour when we'll then be breaking for various sessions. See you again later, and thank you for your time.
nk'uko rero mukomeje kukira televiziyo y'u Rwanda, inama ya Transform Africa cyangwa se inama ivuga ku bukungu muri Afrika ku munsi wayo wa mbere bwo yatangizwaga na Minisitiri w'Intebe w'u Rwanda Dr. Edouard Ngirente, igarutse kuri byinshi birimo uko barebera muri kuri ubukungu bwa Afrika bushobora gutezwa imbere. Nanone bagaragaje ko uno munsi kuba ibihugu bya Afrika byose byarishize hamwe mu kuzamura ubukungu bwabyo ko ari ikimenyetso kigaragara ko Afrika byose bishoboka. Ibi bije bikurikira amasezerano shiro umukono i Kigali agaragaza isoko rusange. Batero ni gute iri soko rusange rishobora kubyazwa umusaruro, ariko by'umwihariko mu bijyanye n'ikoranabuhanga kugira ngo umubare w'abantu bakoresha ikoranabuhanga urusheho kuzamuka. Bagaragaje by'umwihariko ko Afrika uno munsi kuba ifite abaturage basaga miliyari ko ari amahirwe, ko atari ikibazo kuri Afrika. By'umwihariko benshi muri bo n'urubyiruko basaga miliyoni 140, bagaragaza ko byibira mu myaka iri imbere bazabagera kuri miliyari. Bati ibi ni amahirwe kugira ngo bahange imirimo, bahange udushya twinshi cyane kugira ngo barusheho kwiteza imbere. Ntabwo ari ibyo byonyine, none bagarutseho ko bagaragaje nanone izindi mpungenge zihari uno munsi zaho bimwe mu bihugu usanga bisa nkaho bidateza imbere urubyiruko cyangwa se bitumva neza akamaro k'urubyiruko mu ikoranabuhanga. Nanone bakaba bagarutse ku kindi kintu gikomeye cyane kijyanye n'imipaka. Ni gute imipaka ya Afrika uno munsi ishobora guhuzwa n'ikoranabuhanga kugira ngo imipaka abantu bagenda mu munsi ku wundi dusanzwe tumenyereye ko iba imbogamizi kurushaho, ko imipaka yari ikwiye kuba ikoranabuhanga uno munsi. Bagaragaje imibare myinshi aho nanone mu gutangira cyangwa se mu gufungura ku mugaragaro iyi nama, Minisitiri w'Intebe w'u Rwanda yavuze ko uno munsi kuba urubyiruko ruri munsi y'imyaka 25 mu myaka iri imbere bazabangana na miliyari imwe, ati kuba ari amahirwe ntabwo bihagije gusa, gusa ahubwo ni gute noneho bashobora noneho gusangira ubumenyi bakumva ko ubumenyi buri muri Afrika kuri bo budahagije gusa ariko nanone ikintu cy'impungenge kigarutswe nonaha ni ikintu kijyanye n'ububiko bw'amakuru akoreshwa muri Afrika bagaragaje ko amakuru yose dukoresha kuri telefone kuri mudasobwa n'ayandi yose ku isi uno munsi ahabikwa hatazwi abatise ahagera gute ahagezwa nandi abikwa nande ese mabanga akwiye koko kubikwa n'abandi bantu ahanga bagaragaje kugira ngo Afrika igere ku rwego rw'uko ishobora kwibikira amakuru yayo igira ububiko bwayo nuko ifite ibikorwa remezo bihamye kuba ifite internet yihuta kandi kuba ifite nanone n'ubushake bwa politike ku batuye umugabane wa Afrika muri rusange bagaragaje ko muri 2024 urubyiruko ruri hagati y'imyaka 13 ndetse na 30 abo bazaba ariko cyane cyane urugero wanga Minisitiri w'u Rwanda yatanzeho avuga ko muri gahunda ya y'imyaka 7 izagera 2024 ko u Rwanda rwiyemeje ko urubyiruko ruri hagati y'imyaka 16 na 30 byibura ku kigero cya 60% bazaba bafite ubumenyi bushoboka cyangwa se bufatika mu bijyanye n'ikoreshwa ry'ikoranabuhanga none Minisitiri w'ikoranabuhanga w'u Rwanda ubwo yavugaga ijambo yagaragaje ko mu mwaka washize u Rwanda rwabashije kwinjiza amafaranga asaga miliyari y'amadolari y'amanyamerika aturutse mu ikoranabuhanga mu mirimo yagiye ihanga udushya byakoresheje ikoranabuhanga ko byinjije amafaranga agera kuri miliyari bavuga ko bidahagije kuko ubu no munsi isa nkaho itangije kugira ngo byibura Afrika cyangwa se u Rwanda muri rusange bumve ko byose bishoboka kuko urugero batanze nuko byibura service zitangwa online cyangwa se zitangwa akoresheje internet mu Rwanda uno munsi zagera kuri 93 ziracyari nkeya ariko bakagaragaza ko byibura uzatangire byibura ko ari umusanzu ufatika zimaze kugaragaza nanone bagaragaje ko uno munsi abaturage batuye isi bangana na 51% bafite internet mu gihe bagera kuri 49 badafite internet ibi biracyari imbogamizi byaba mu bijyanye no kwiteza cyase mu Rwanda dushya ariko cyagarutswe nanone cyakomeje gutera abantu impungenge ni gute ubuhahirane cyangwa se ubufatanye mu gihe habayeho ko habayeho kudaha agaciro urubyiruko kandi urubyiruko aribo bafite ubushake mu guhanga udushya mu kumva ko amakampani cyangwa se amasosiyete manini cyane ku isi ariyo akwiye kuryamira amasosiyete matoya kandi amasosiyete matoya ariyo ayoborwa n'urubyiruko kandi urwo rubyiruko rufite ubushake mu guhanga ibintu bakoresheje ikoranabuhanga bagaragaza ko internet atari igikoresho cy'abantu bakize cyangwa se bafite amafaranga ahubwo ko internet ishobora kwifashishwa n'abantu bafite ubushobozi bukeya ariko bagahanga byinshi kugira ngo barusheho kugeza serivisi nyinshi ku bantu nanone mu byagarutsweho bagaragaje ko byibura ibihugu 25 kugeza kuno munsi bidakoresha internet ku isi yose 21 ari ibihugu dusanga muri Afrika ariko baza mu butayu ibihugu biri mu butayu bwo munsi y'ubutayu bwa Sahara bagaragaje ku kibazo cya mobile money ni urugero rwiza cyane rwakomeje kugarukaho batanga ingero bati byibura 44% by'ibihugu byo muri East Africa byibura bakoresha bafite telefone ku kiro cya 44% bakavuga ko nanone amafaranga yinjizwa muri ino bihugu akenshi ubuhahirane cyangwa se akoreshwa hagati yo kohereza amafaranga transaction ariko bagarukana no ku kibazo cya security cyangwa cy'umutekano w'aya mafaranga bati impungenge z'umutekano w'amafaranga ntabwo ari byari bikwiye gushyirwa imbere cyangwa se kuza kwisonga ahubwo akwiye kureberwa hamwe ni gute bishobora guhindura ubuzima bw'abantu batanze urugero rw'u Rwanda kuba ikoranabuhanga ryaraje ryateye imbere ryagaragaje ko bishoboka byose cyane cyane mu buhinzi aho hasigaye hakoreshwa drone cyangwa se no mu buvuzi hasigaye hakoreshwa drone kugira ngo bageze amaraso ku bitaro bitandukanye bati ingero nk'izi ngizi zagaragaje ko bishoboka mu Rwanda ati nande hose birashoboka muri Afrika ariko kugira ngo byose bigerweho nuko hagomba kubaho ibikorwa remezo bihamye hagomba kubaho ubushake bwa politiki ariko hejuru byose hagomba kubaho nanone internet kandi ihendutse kandi ikaboneka igihe icyari cyo cyose inama kino cyamunsi rero ikaba ihumurije ariko ntabwo ari yonyine beraga muri auditorium no mu zindi sare harimo inama nyinshi cyane zakomeje kugenda ziba RBA mu biganiro bitandukanye ndetse makuru tuzakomeza kubagezaho kandi dufasha karuko mukomeze mukurikiza izindi gahunda zose televiziyo Rwanda yabateguriye turagaruka mu kanya gatoya.